Hello, today I'll be presenting the scenario for Universal Coffee Machines, which is a smart coffee machine seller with a rich partner seller, partner reseller network, and a partner service network. They are seeking to improve their customer support and engagement platform using Salesforce. They're also introducing a new line of coffee machines that have additional telemetry that make the coffee machine super smart. The risks that identified is that they will be subject to the Chinese Great Firewall, which will impact their identity access management and integration strategy. For the ERP that is Chinese, that is hosted behind the firewall, it will require that the ERP authenticates locally against that LDAP that they described here for their authentication. So we'll integrate with an identity provider. We'll just have them locally authenticate. And then in order to decouple the operations that are behind the firewall and to reduce the risk of latency, we'll have an integrations hub that is behind the Chinese firewall as well, that integrates directly with the global ESB for the purpose of the global operations. So there'll be operations that are behind the firewall for the systems that are behind the firewall. And then for any global systems, they will have a separate ESB, and then integration hub will integrate with the global ESB. Solution also includes some large data volumes for case, work orders, and work per line items. We'll have a tiered storage for hot to cold, the Salesforce archive, so hot for operational records, and then cold once they're non-operational, and they'll go into cold storage. And then for any high volume telemetry events that are done on-prem, we'll have a runtime fabric that is hosted on-prem that will throttle any telemetry events, and then those will then be sent or pushed using Apache Kafka to the global ESB. So we'll have a messaging queue that the global ESB can then subscribe to and then pull events from. The assumptions I made is that Salesforce will be a system of record for the partner relationship management, orders, and service. There will be a global ESB and a runtime fabric for the on-prem integration of event telemetry data. And then there will be a localized Chinese integration hub that will be able to handle the local operations there so that there's not any interruptions to the Chinese operations. And then we'll have an Okta's IDP for the European and Australian authentication. Moving on now to the actors. We have technicians and resellers. Both are Customer Community Plus licensed users, and they're external users. And the reason why they'll have Customer Community Plus is because they'll need advanced sharing. But they don't need partner community license since they aren't accessing directly the leads or opportunity objects. The internal users for partner support will receive Service Cloud and Sales Cloud license. They will be dealing a lot with cases, case management, and potentially omnichannel. And they'll also be needing to access Sales Cloud objects, including orders and the sales lifecycle. Design and manufacturing will not be accessing Salesforce directly. They'll just be accessing the design system based on the region. There'll be two instances, the Chinese instance and then the Australian instance. And then for management, they'll receive Service Cloud and Sales Cloud license. And then customers receive Customer Community license. The system landscape itself is implemented using a single org with multi-language enabled for internationalization across their different localized regions here, including China and Australia and European Union. We'll enable multi-language using a translator using Translation Workbench that's responsible for translating metadata, including custom labels and Visualforce email templates. The Salesforce org itself will have Chargent installed for the payment processing, and Salesforce Archive will be enabled for the purpose of the cold storage and the tiered storage. There'll be a partner portal for the resellers and technicians to access the products that they're attempting to resell and to create orders. And then the customer portal will be available for customers to raise cases. Internal users will authenticate using Okta, and Okta will federate identities from Active Directory. There'll be global ESB that integrates with the product design app. The global ESB will also integrate with the ERP for Australia for the manufacturing operations. The global ESB will also integrate with the runtime fabric that is hosted on-prem for the connectivity with the data layer, which is the telemetry hub that will receive events from the coffee machines, the smart coffee machines, and then be able to push to a webhook endpoint to the runtime fabric events around telemetry. Runtime fabric will then be able to integrate using a quasi-secure tunnel with the global ESB. The global ESB will then be able to take those payloads and then send them off to Salesforce for the purpose of updating assets or any other operations. The global ESB will also integrate with a localized ESB that's behind the Great Firewall. That localized ESB will integrate with the product design app and then the ERP for China. There's also currently a local LDAP that is for Chinese authentication that will also do Chinese authentication for the Chinese users for the product design app and the ERP. We will be decommissioning the Australian ERP, specifically the sales and service components within the ERP, and so we'll be migrating the CRM data into Salesforce for that. And then the public website will also be decommissioned and will be, since the public website is mostly for product documentation, we'll just be creating knowledge articles directly within the Salesforce org. The ERP is what we'll be talking about next. So let's talk about starting with the general public accessing the system. Guest users will be accessing the portal. That's assuming that they don't hit the limits for guest user accessing the portal. But it didn't describe really the limits here, so I'm going to assume that we're well below them, or the actual expected volume of traffic by guest users. But regardless, what a prospect will do when they are attempting to onboard as a reseller or as a technician, they will authenticate, or they'll register in the partner portal and then have a user set up for them for the partner portal authentication. That will then create a screen flow with the ability for them to create a lead with a type for the type of reseller they are. Actually, they're not going to authenticate initially. Oops. There's just going to be a screen flow, and it's going to be a web to lead form to create a lead with the type from the partner portal. Once the lead is then created, the application, which is the lead record, will be reviewed by the partner support. The lead is assigned initially to the partner support, where they will be able to then qualify and convert the lead to a business account if it's a reseller, or to a person account if it's an individual technician. The business account can also be created for a technician if it's actually a business with multiple different technicians under it. A key contact onto the business account will also be set up to be able to add additional users under that same account. They will be set up with the delegated external user administrator permission. The customer will show up at the reseller store, and the reseller needs the ability to go into the portal and then look for if the customer already exists within the ERD as a customer, as a person account. So we'll have a screen flow that's set up where they can type in the email address that checks to see if the customer already exists. If the customer doesn't already exist, then that will enable the creation of a person account for the customer. The staff at the store will then, if it is a sale, create an order and an order item within the portal. There's going to be a screen flow for that, of course, to give them guidance on how to create the order and the order item. If there isn't a sale and they just want to record that the customer showed up, they can log an activity as well. Once the order is activated, the order will create, first of all, an asset that tracks the device, which is the machine that's being shipped to the customer. The asset is created per order item, so whatever they've bought will have an asset that's initially created. The asset is actually owned by the partner support queue initially, and then they will update the serial number based on the data that's coming from the ERP, which is the manufacturing ERP that's either in China or in Australia. So they'll update the asset number or the serial number on the asset. That partner support queue, whoever assigns themselves as the owner, will then do that update. Once the asset gets a serial number, there will be registered flow that will create a work order. That work order is then owned by the technician. And there will also be a work order line item that looks up to the asset that was created and has now a serial number. So the reason why we're having the work order separated from the work order line item that looks up to the asset is so that we can have a work order that potentially has multiple different devices that need to be installed at the same household or at the same place. And if the technician wants to do that on a single trip, that is able to be done, and also tracked the cost of the products used during that visit. Once the asset is then set up, there will be a usage event that the device, once it's connected to the internet, will send a message to. There will be a usage event that will be fired by the smart coffee machine. That smart coffee machine will fire an event to an on-premise telemetry data layer, which will then trigger an event that is subscribed to by the runtime fabric. This runtime fabric will then transform the payload into the accepted format for the global ESB. And then that will update the asset based on the serial number of the asset with the fact that the coffee machine has been set up and it's connected to the internet. Once that is set up, the asset will then be marked as installed and the global ESB will also be communicated if there is a service need for that smart coffee machine as well, using the same method. So what will happen is that the coffee machine will fire an event that is then pooled at the data layer. The data layer will then push any telemetry events to the runtime fabric. The runtime fabric will then push any events to the global ESB. And then the ESB will then orchestrate the creation of a case, and then a case auto response to the customer, notifying them that there has been a case created on their coffee machine. That case is then, talking about the other ways of creating a case. So we have a case that's related to the asset based on the serial number. That case is then owned by the support team, but there's other ways that cases can be created using a screen flow where the customer can log into the customer portal and create a case there. It can also be done via the ESB, where it can create a case via orchestration like I talked about. Salesforce Voice can also be used. They can call a number. Salesforce Voice will, using a CTI integrated Amazon Connect service, will go to a call center or go to a Salesforce Voice service that will then create a case automatically and then relate the call record to the case. And then the final way is that if the customer sends an email to a support email, we'll have an email case service that will create a case as well. And that case will also include auto response to the customer, notifying them that a case has been received, and then we'll follow up. Once the case is created, that will then be assigned to a support queue as the owner. That support queue will then determine if a visit is required. If it is required, they'll flag it as such, and then there will be a record flow that will create a work order and work order line item for the asset under the case. If the self-service is, if it's self-repair, then we'll have case articles that are related to the case. And then we'll also send them instructions on how to complete it themselves using the knowledge articles. And then there's another requirement around a kit where they send relevant parts and instructions are sent to the customer. So the instructions are going to be facilitated by the knowledge article. The kit with the relevant parts are tracked on the work order line item as well, and the work order. So the work order will be created and not owned by the tech, but owned by the support queue or that support person who took on the case initially. And then if it is a self-service, what will happen is that there will be an event. If it's self-serviced and the coffee machine is back online, there will be an event that the event pooling service will receive and then notify the ESB that the issue has been resolved. And that will then update the work order as having been completed, and the associated products will be logged there too for the later invoicing. So the case is then, if the case is passed, like it'll mark the case as closed. It'll also mark the work order as completed via the asset serial number. And then if the work order is past a certain date, then the request is escalated. Instead, like if the work order itself that's been created for the self-service is past a certain date as a deadline, then it will escalate actually to a tech as the owner, who will then follow up and actually just schedule a visit with the customer to do it instead. The technician, once they get assigned the work order, will create an event on the work order as well, which will mark the date when they will visit and repair the machine. The technician will also be able to mark on the work order items the products that they used, the cost of the bill of materials for the actual repair. And then once they mark the work order as completed, the work order line item will integrate with the ERP via a fire and forget pattern integration that will include the accounts payable data using SOAP API. If the usage date, so if the warranty is expired, then what it will do is create a charging order that's related to the actual work order that will then be used for the purpose of billing the customer of the actual service fee. The customer will be able to view any service requests or any invoice details via a sharing set that's on the work order itself. And then the charging order will also be able to be accessible to them too, using the sharing set. Okay, so the customers are expected to grow by a significant volume. Since they are operational records, we'll need to retain them. What we'll do is mitigate the large data volume risk is use external IDs on the customer and asset records. We'll have tiered storage for any of these cases and the work orders and work order line items, which will progressively archive case records, work order line items records based on the status. If the status is closed or completed, then we'll archive the records to S3. And those are then exposed back into Salesforce via external objects and related directly to the customer, which I represented here. We'll have ESB throttling for those events, those high volume events. And then for the legacy data, we'll be using an ETL process where the data steward will use a staging table to initially stage the data, make sure that the legacy data maps to the target schema, that the data quality is good, that we've deduplicated all of the customers, that there's referential integrity. And then those will then be migrated on that cut over to Salesforce, and then there will be a data load as well. Details of all the customers with active machines that are standard warranty will be based on the usage date field on the asset. I'm assuming that the legacy data will have the actual warranty dates as well, so that we can then split those off in the staging table, or the data steward can. The reseller will also need to be able to be accredited to the assets that they sold. So we will have a lookup on the asset to the reseller, so they have the credit. Salesforce Archive will expose the external object for cases that has an indirect lookup to the asset as well. So I'll show you where we're represent that real quick. There will be a link between the service requests and the technicians who worked on them based on the work order and work line item records. I'm assuming that the technicians aren't always going to be represented as a person account or even as a business account within the system, potentially have churn. So what I can reasonably expect is that we'll have the legacy records just stamp a text field if they aren't already in the system, or if they aren't actually active technicians. And then invoices for all previously raised service requests will be tracked on the charge and order. It didn't differentiate between invoices that are already paid and invoices that are pending, but I'm assuming that we need to migrate all of them. So we'll have a separate, besides the active charge and orders and our charge and orders ongoing, we'll have a separate object for external object for the charge and for invoices as well. And the current ERP system has data quality issues and duplicate data, so we'll have an ATL, data steward, and then the deployment can happen over the weekend, but legacy data migration from this will take over a week. What we'll have is the data stage prior to the load via the ETL, and then a delta load, of course. And these last two requirements, we're talking about the data that needs to be accessible. We'll have an LWC for the external objects that are talked about here around the machine, the ownership, warranty information, legacy data. And then we'll have a Salesforce Archive expose the OData connectors, and those are actually stored as CSVs in S3, but there will be OData connectors from S3 to separate OData connectors, not from S3, but there's an integration layer that exposes OData connectors for external objects that transforms the CSVs into OData connectors for the purpose of creating external objects in Salesforce. And then the final set here is around the ability for service requests to be visible for legacy data, and then also data for post go live, and they need to be reportable in the new solution. So I'm going to use external objects via S3, and then the legacy data will be exposed via S3, and then for any future data or for any active data, they'll be exposed as standard objects. And then once they are closed or once they are completed, they'll be archived to S3 as well. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.